everyone. Today we're going to be turning some sketchbook pages into some paintings. I made a YouTube short of some loose kind of watercolour / marker-esque sketches that I did in my Royal Talent sketchbook. I did a poppy field, a lavender field, and I believe I attempted a waterfall, but that didn't go as planned and it didn't turn out too well, the waterfall scene, but all was fine. It's always good to experiment and make mistakes, which is why it's brilliant to have a sketchbook or multiple sketchbooks if you have that kind of time. I always find it almost a bit easier and a less pressure filled experience when I use my sketchbook as a guidance on what kind of painting I want to do and what I want certain areas or elements to look like. It kind of takes the pressure off once you've done whatever you want to paint in your sketchbook just for reference. You kind of have a guideline of where you want certain elements of the sketch down on the painting, and since you've already done it technically once in your sketchbook, it's kind of like you know how to go about it, and you know already certain mistakes you might have made previously in the sketch, and you know kind of things to avoid, and a rough idea and guides what you want sketched out and worked on. It also helped because I added markers onto the final sketchbook sketch of these, so I kind of knew what markers went with each other, what kind of blended better together, what colours didn't go with each other, and what didn't blend so well. So just going through everything with more ease since you already semi-created the piece already. I love once a sketch is complete, just adding an outline with some fine liner. I tend to go in with a brown or a sepia, which is kind of like a more cool toned brown. I feel like it gives less of a harsh but still visible outline compared to using just black fine liner. I still sometimes go in with a black fine liner, but that's usually if I want a more prominent outline, whereas if I just want more of a reference line just to kind of guide where certain parts of the painting is, I will kind of go with a more cool tone or a lighter fine liner, which is when I will use the brown and the sepia. As I said previously, it basically just gives less of a harsh outline and doesn't make it so obvious, but you still get a good reference. But once colour is added, it's not the only thing noticeable and doesn't take away from the painting and other products you want to add to it. For one sketch, we are doing a nice sunset looking over a lavender field. I did this in my sketchbook, and then I also got the inspo picture from a site called Pexels, which I will insert here. These sites like Pexels and Pixabay are just really great for inspiration and also reference photos if you are wanting something like pictures that are royalty free, but they're just really good references, and you get to see some people's amazing photography on the sites, and obviously the website's completely free, so I feel like it's really good. And considering it's free, you get really good quality photos from people. When I don't know what to paint or I don't really have much inspiration at the moment, I will kind of just go through different things that I've saved over the years, and I will just pick a random one and sketch that out. So it takes a lot of that pressure off as well. The second sketch being of a field with a Highland cow. I believe that's the type of cow that is on this reference photo I will show now. I was originally going to do a loose design from my sketchbook of this mossy mini waterfall scape, but this was just a sketch that I did, which I'll show now from my sketchbook of it. As you can see, it didn't turn out too well. It doesn't really look like a waterfall. It's just a load of green splodge with some white Posca on top. And because it didn't turn out too brilliant, I knew that I was just going to struggle with doing it even in painting form. So instead of recreating that sketch, I made myself come to the conclusion that I really need to kind of do a little study and focus on water and how to draw and paint water. So I think that'll be my next goal in my sketchbook. I'm definitely going to try and learn to paint water, whether that be waterfalls, some rivers, ocean scenes, different things like that, just to kind of get a gist of how to make it look like water. But obviously that's quite a big topic, so I will save that for later down the line in my sketchbook. This basically was the reference photo of the mossy waterfall that I use for the sketchbook. Then I'll insert again what I did in my sketchbook for that. And then this is the new reference photo with the Highland cow. And then this is kind of like the outline that I did for that reference photo that I got. The choice of watercolour today were some of the Winsor & Newton Cotman colours. I always like a nice watercolour wash for the background with my mixed media paintings. Cotman are one of my favourite watercolours, and they're definitely one of the more affordable ranges of watercolours I tend to find anyway, especially for the quality you get. Same with the Mungyo, these do have a little bit of life fast on both parts, and I just feel like they're quite pigmented and really good quality considering how cheap you can get some of the product. Don't get me wrong, some of them will be a bit more pricier, but the Mungyo usually come in actual palettes and they're relatively cost effective. I think my 24 pan of them was about £10, £14. And then I think I got the Cotman, I think each little tube was around like the £3 to £4 mark when you used to be able to get them from places like the Range. Some of the colours, a bit more, like certain turquoises and teals were a little bit more expensive, but I think still relatively quite affordable for the quality. If I ever want something a bit more opaque and bold, or something that's just a little bit more pigmented and has a little higher light fast, I tend to go in with my Rosa Gallery or the professional Winsor & Newton watercolours, as they're a little bit of a higher light fast and a little bit more opaque, so they kind of are a bit more pigmented and they're just their durability and last a little longer. They sometimes, especially the Rosa, remind me a lot more of gouache with how pigmented they are, and I just tend to find they give more of a gouache feel, I don't know why, than watercolour almost. But these are a little bit more pricier, so I tend to use these a little less frequently because obviously they were quite expensive to buy the ones that I currently have. So I use these just now and then. I tend to usually go in with the Mungyo or the Cotman, and sometimes I will go in with the Royal Talons, little mini palettes as well of watercolours. They're quite affordable and cheap too. Or the Dale & Roney Aquafine's quite a good one as well. They're quite affordable and quite good quality too. I love how the watercolours blended in this video. I always find with watercolours it's so satisfying to watch them, especially when the paper, you've already like pre-wet the paper. I just love how they kind of just move on their own, and it's almost like therapeutic just watching the watercolour kind of just glide itself along the wet paper. I don't know, I just kind of like the look of it. But yes, I found that they were just really easy to blend. I just always find these are just such a staple watercolour to use. They always just are really easy to use, easy to blend. The colours are really decent, and I just tend to always find I enjoy using them. However, I can't just obviously give all the credit to the paint. I always feel like a good watercolour paper or pad comes in handy as well, in more ways than one. Today we're using the Hahnemuhle Expressions cold pressed matte paper. It's also gummed on the sides, which just helps with keeping the paper nice and flat, and it also helps with minor buckling. It does slightly lift up a little bit, but with it being so tight and gummed basically is just glued around the edges, I just find it keeps it from buckling even more so, and just makes it easier to paint on. So paper quality is definitely another plus when doing watercolours. I feel like the high quality paper you're using, the less frustrated you're going to get with watercolours, as it can be a hard and a little bit of a frustrating medium to use. So I completely understand what people mean, because sometimes I'll use watercolours in Royal Talons sketchbooks or sea whites where they do buckle a little bit more because they are a mixed media sketchbook, but they're not really meant to hold loads of water, and it can be quite frustrating and doesn't turn out too great. But then when you actually do the same kind of thing on actual watercolour paper, especially things like the cotton paper, the Hahnemühle paper. I think you can get like moleskin watercolour paper. You can get the thicker, I think it's called Cardi papers, is it? They're like a handmade watercolour paper. I find theirs is really good as well. The texture is a lot thicker though on the Cardi paper, just as like a pre-warning. So if you don't like a lot of texture to your paper, it's definitely not a one. I also really like my stationery watercolour sketchbooks that you can get from eBay. There is a hot pressed sketchbook, so there is less texture on the page. They really work well. I've heard Arches is really good, but I've never used their watercolour paper personally. The Aquafine's alright, the Dale and Roney Aquafine papers, it's alright, and so is the Bockingford blocks. They're not too bad. I do find they still buckle quite a bit, so they can still be a little frustrating. And also I've tried the Van Gogh gummed watercolour Royal Talent paper, and I actually really enjoy that. So some of Royal Talent's watercolour paper is really good as well. They're just some random names that I'm just throwing out there that you could give a try, and I always find it just is a better experience when you're using paper that is better, basically, or designed at least for that medium that you're using. In terms of the Hahnemühle Expressions watercolour paper, this will be the second time using it, and I'm still in love with it, and it's just becoming slowly one of my favourite watercolour papers to use. Just assists the paint really well. It just gives nice fluidity, and just the paint just seems to work its way across the paper really well, and it just blends really well. There was no granulation of the paper, no paper coming up, and like I say, very minor buckling, which is just a win-win all round, and it's definitely one of my favourites. Now, if you're not new to my channel, everyone will know what time it is. It is basically time for me to go in with the markers. I am obsessed, as people will already know, with adding Faber-Castell or Lyra or just any form of marker, Poscas, all of it. I just love adding markers onto paintings. I don't know why. I like a light wash of watercolour, and then I always have to go in with markers, whether that's your Posca acrylic markers, your more water soluble like your Lyra and your Faber-Castell, or just alcohol markers in general. I just love it all. Fine liners, the Sakura, jelly roll gel pens, like love it all. Just anything added on top, I just find it gives for such good effect. And with also being obsessed, I find it just always looks really good. I don't know why. And I always feel like it's really good for finer details, those details that you just want to stand out and be more pigmented on the page compared to the rest of maybe the background. So more like the foreground elements to the painting, I will always kind of do in markers. I don't have really a specific method with doing this. I kind of just fully go in without much idea of what to do. I just pick certain colours that I either like or I think fits the theme of whatever I'm painting on the day, and most of this I will just kind of go in with them and just do what I feel fit, basically, whether that's just random lines here and there. I'll do random like squiggly outlines or little like zigzaggy patterns for more like pine type trees. I just kind of go with any general outline and pattern and just keep working at until it kind of looks what I want it to look like, whether that's grass, a hill, an animal fur coat, things like that, like the fur, of the coat of the animal I'm drawing, such as the cow. But really I mainly go in with the Lyra and the Faber-Castell Gold Faber dual aqua markers for this painting, especially the Highland Cow one. And then for the Poscas, I mainly added the cream and the white for the highlights of the clouds, and also some of the blades of grass more in the foreground, because this kind of reference photo I was using was more of like a like a highland kind of moorlandy area, so there was like a lot of like dry patches of grass. So I went in with the cream and it kind of just adds in a good effect for that, and then the white for some of the highlights of the cow's horns and also a bit of the clouds, and it just adds for good effect. And like I say, I don't really do anything specific. I just kind of splodge these kind of markers all over the place until it looks like what I think it needs to look like. So there's no real method to it, just absolute craziness and a person with some markers just going ham on a painting. For the lavender field, I used the purple chunky Posca, so that's a 3M point tip size. Just kind of added some like chunky wobbly outlines around the rows of lavenders in the field. and kind of did like some random dots here and there across the lavender field as well with the same Posca. And then for the smaller parts of lavender, I also went in with some of the Faber-Castell jewel markers and just added different purple shades and just kind of did a dot effect to kind of mimic some form of like flowerage basically in the field, just rather than drawing each individual piece of lavender. I find it did kind of give an okay effect. I've just kind of, when I do have a field and it's got like a lot of flowers in it, I'll just kind of do loads of multicoloured dots or different shades of a certain colour in dots and kind of just make it or mimic the sense that it is flowers and a field of something. Then rather than painting the clouds, I just fully went in with the markers, adding a mix of cool grey, light pink and a purple with hints of like cream and white Posca for the highlights of the clouds. I did think the pink was way lighter than I thought it would be, but these are really, it turned out to be a much darker pink than I thought. So the only thing I would change with doing the clouds is use a far lighter pink, like more of a what would be considered like a pale, like a blush kind of colour, rather than that pink. It was just a bit too dark, personally, for the pink that I wanted. But the lid deceived me because I'll have to try and insert a photo, but the picture, the Faber-Castell lid for that pink looked really light and I thought it would work. But that was the only thing I would have changed. They turned out way better than they did in my sketchbook, I think, and the random splodging of the markers kind of just worked and added like a good shadow effect for the clouds. I think the only thing, like I said, I would have done differently is pick a lighter pink, more of like a blush kind of colour. But once again, I was mainly deceived by the lid colour. I thought it was way lighter than it was, and when I did one bit of the pink, I was like, oh, well, I've done it now, I kind of just have to go in with it. So I just stuck with that colour, and then just added more cream and white just to kind of lighten up the clouds so they weren't so dark. Once I finished these sheets and did the paintings, because these Hahnemühle pages don't fit in my portfolio folder, I decided to cut these down, which is why I did two paintings on one. The Hahnemühle paper is 24 by 30 centimetres and I cut these down to 15 by 23 centimetres just so they fit in my sketchbook. Technically it's 23.7 roughly, so because it is a bit longer. But I kind of just cut these into 2 little paintings, and then these fit perfectly in my portfolio. But if you kind of just want something that's like quite a big expanse of page and you just want to do one massive painting, the Hahnemühle paper, like I said, is 24 by 30 centimetres if you guys are interested. And I did some house sparrow birds on one of these Hahnemühle pages, and I didn't cut that down, but it doesn't fit in my book, and I just like my paintings to be kept flat, and obviously I put them in individual sleeves so they don't get damaged. But these are basically the end result of the paintings. I hope you guys like them, and I hope you guys enjoyed the video for this week's painting session. I look forward to seeing everyone in next week's video too, but until then, I hope everyone has an amazing weekend and a productive new week start. See you all soon. Bye!